The Texas sun blazed mercilessly over the endless prairie, turning the landscape into a shimmering sea of gold and brown. Mesquite trees stood like lonely sentinels against the vast horizon, their twisted branches casting short shadows on the parched earth. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant dust storms. On the outskirts of Amarillo, a silver Ford F-150 rumbled down a forgotten dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Inside, 3 people sat in heavy silence, the kind of silence that precedes terrible decisions. Dorothy Whitmore, 76 years old, sat in the back seat, her weathered hands clutching a worn leather purse. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her pale blue eyes watched the landscape with innocent wonder. She wore a floral dress, her Sunday best, because her son had told her they were going somewhere special. Behind the wheel, her son, Brandon Whitmore, 53, gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His jaw was set in a hard line, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to look at the rearview mirror where he might catch his mother's reflection. Beside him sat his wife, Crystal, 48, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously against her phone screen. She wore designer sunglasses that hid more than just the sun, they hid the cold calculation in her eyes. Dorothy didn't know it yet, but she was about to experience the deepest betrayal a human being could endure, and she was about to meet the most unlikely savior. 3 weeks earlier, in their spacious home in the wealthy suburbs of Amarillo, Crystal had planted the seed of a terrible idea in Brandon's mind. It started innocently enough, complaints about Dorothy's forgetfulness, her confusion, the burden of care. "She's getting worse, Brandon," Crystal whispered one night as they lay in their king-sized bed. "Yesterday she asked me 3 times if it was Christmas. She thought I was your sister. Any day now she could change that will and leave everything to some charity or worse, to your cousin Derek who hasn't spoken to her in 20 years. The inheritance. $300,000 from Dorothy's late husband's life insurance and pension. The paid-off house worth $500,000. The savings account that represented 50 years of careful, modest living." Brandon had tried to ignore the whispers at first. But Crystal was persistent, relentless, painting pictures of financial freedom, of the dream RV they could buy, of early retirement, of a life without the burden of caring for an aging mother who no longer recognized them half the time. "There are places," Crystal had said carefully one evening, her voice honey-sweet with poison. "Remote places. The prairie is vast. People get lost. Elderly people with dementia wander off. It happens all the time. Nobody would question it." The plan took shape slowly, like a cancer growing in darkness. They would take Dorothy on a drive, a special outing, they'd say. They'd stop somewhere remote, help her out to stretch her legs, and then they'd simply leave. By the time anyone found her, if anyone found her, they'd be the grieving son and daughter-in-law, devastated by the tragic loss. Now, as the truck bounced over the rutted road, Dorothy spoke for the first time in an hour. "Brandon, sweetheart, where are we going? This doesn't look like the restaurant you mentioned." "Just a little further, Mom," Brandon replied, his voice tight. "There's a scenic overlook. Thought you'd like to see it before lunch." Crystal's phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Did you do it yet?" She quickly deleted it, her heart pounding. The truck traveled deeper into the prairie, far from the main highway, far from civilization. They passed an old abandoned ranch, weathered fence posts marking property that hadn't been worked in decades. A windmill stood motionless, its blades frozen with rust. Finally, Brandon pulled off the road entirely, driving across open prairie until he stopped near a cluster of mesquite trees. Nothing but grassland stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional rock formation or dried creek bed. "Why are we stopping here?" Dorothy asked, confusion creeping into her voice. "Brandon, I don't understand." "Let's stretch our legs, Mom," Brandon said, not meeting her eyes. "You've been sitting for a while. The fresh air will be good for you." He helped her out of the truck with mechanical gentleness, the kind that comes from obligation, not love. Dorothy's legs were unsteady. She'd had a hip replacement 2 years ago, and long periods of sitting made her stiff. Crystal remained in the truck, her face turned toward the window, unable or unwilling to watch. "Take your purse, Mom," Brandon said, handing it to her along with her wooden cane, the one with the carved handle that her late husband had made for her 40th anniversary. Dorothy took a few hesitant steps, leaning heavily on the cane. The grass was tall here, reaching her knees, and the ground was uneven. She turned to ask Brandon if they should really be walking so far from the road, but what she saw made her blood run cold. Brandon was already back in the truck. The engine was running. "Brandon!" she called, her voice thin and uncertain. "What's happening?" For just a moment, one terrible, eternal moment, Brandon looked at his mother through the open window. Their eyes met, and Dorothy saw something that shattered her heart into 1,000 pieces. Guilt, shame, and cold determination. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, though the words were barely audible over the engine. "I'm so sorry." "Brandon!" Dorothy screamed, trying to move toward the truck, but her hip wouldn't cooperate. "Don't leave me here! Please!" The truck lurched forward, tires spitting dirt and grass. Dorothy stumbled, fell to her knees, her cane flying from her grasp. She tried to stand, reaching out with desperate hands, but the truck was already moving, becoming smaller, disappearing into a cloud of dust. "Brandon, I'm your mother!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Please, come back!" But the truck didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. The silence that followed was absolute. Dorothy knelt in the dirt, her body shaking, not just from the fall, but from shock that went deeper than physical pain. How? How could her own son, the baby she'd nursed, the child she'd sacrificed everything for, do this? The tears came then, hot and bitter, streaming down her weathered face. But the Texas heat dried them quickly, leaving only salt tracks on her skin. Reality settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She was alone in the middle of the Texas prairie, miles from help, without water, without shelter, without hope. And night was coming. Dorothy managed to retrieve her cane after several painful attempts, each movement sending sharp protests through her aging joints. Using it for support, she pulled herself upright, swaying slightly as waves of dizziness washed over her. The shock was giving way to something else now, primal fear. She scanned the horizon in every direction. Nothing but endless prairie stretched before her, the landscape rippling in the heat like water. No buildings, no roads, no signs of human civilization, just grass, mesquite, and the occasional cactus standing like silent witnesses to her abandonment. Dorothy tried to think logically. Which direction had they come from? But the truck had taken so many turns on unmarked paths that she'd lost all sense of direction. Every direction looked the same, vast, empty, merciless. She thought about walking, but where? Her hip ached from the fall, and she knew from her doctor that she could barely manage half a mile on good days with her cane. Out here, in this heat, on this uneven ground, she'd be lucky to make it 100 yards. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red. Soon it would be dark. Soon the temperature would drop. Dorothy had lived in Texas long enough to know that prairie nights could be brutally cold, especially for someone without shelter. She found a relatively flat spot near one of the mesquite trees and lowered herself carefully to the ground, her back against the rough bark. Her throat was already dry, her lips beginning to crack. She'd had a few sips of water during the drive, but that felt like hours ago. "Why, Brandon?" she whispered to the empty prairie. "What did I do wrong?" But deep down, she knew it wasn't about what she'd done. It was about what she had. Money that someone else wanted badly enough to commit murder. Because that's what this was, she realized with crystalline clarity. Murder. Just slower, more cowardly than a gun or knife. As the sun touched the horizon, Dorothy heard something that made her heart freeze. Movement in the tall grass. Not wind. Something deliberate, something large moving through the vegetation toward her. Her hands gripped the cane tighter, though she knew it would be useless against any predator. Texas had coyotes, wild hogs, even the occasional mountain lion in remote areas. Any of them could end her life in moments. The grass parted, and Dorothy's breath caught in her throat. It was a bull. Not a wild animal, but clearly a ranch bull. Massive, powerful, with a dark coat that gleamed in the fading light. He stood at least 6 feet at the shoulder, easily weighing over 2,000 pounds. His horns were thick and curved, capable of goring a person with a single toss of his head. But what stopped Dorothy's heart wasn't his size, it was his eyes. They were watching her with an intensity that seemed almost human, not with the blank stare of livestock, but with something that looked like awareness, like intelligence. The bull took a step closer. Dorothy pressed herself back against the tree, her body trembling. She'd heard stories about ranch bulls, how dangerous they could be, how unpredictable. Some had trampled or attacked handlers who'd worked with them for years. "Please," she whispered, not sure why she was speaking to an animal. "Please don't hurt me. I've already been hurt enough today." The bull stopped about 15 feet away. His massive head lowered slightly, and he made a sound. Not an aggressive snort, but something softer, almost questioning. His nostrils flared as he scented the air, and Dorothy realized he was smelling her fear, her sweat, her tears. They stayed like that for long minutes, woman and bull, both perfectly still. The sun continued to sink and shadows grew longer. Finally, moving with surprising gentleness for such a massive creature, the bull lowered himself to the ground. He didn't approach closer. He simply lay down in the grass, his body positioned between Dorothy and the darkening prairie beyond, as if he was standing guard. Dorothy blinked, certain she was hallucinating from shock and dehydration. But when she opened her eyes, the bull was still there, still in that protective position, his ears swiveling to catch sounds in the growing darkness. The temperature began to drop rapidly as full darkness fell. Dorothy's thin floral dress provided almost no warmth. She wrapped her arms around herself, but it was useless. The cold seeped into her bones, making her teeth chatter, her body shake violently. She was going to die of exposure, she realized. Even if she survived the night, tomorrow's heat would finish what the cold started. There was no water, no food, no shelter. Just her and this strange bull who'd chosen, for reasons she couldn't fathom, to stay with her. Then something extraordinary happened. The bull stood up, and Dorothy's fear returned. Was he leaving? Was he going to attack? But instead he moved closer, carefully, deliberately, until he was lying down right beside her, his massive, warm body pressed against her side. The heat radiating from him was immediate and intense. Dorothy could feel it seeping through her thin dress, warming her frozen limbs. She could hear his heartbeat, slow, steady, powerful, and his breathing, deep and rhythmic. Slowly, hardly believing what she was doing, Dorothy shifted closer to the bull's warmth. She leaned against his side, feeling the rise and fall of his massive ribcage. His hide was surprisingly soft, and beneath it she could feel the incredible strength of muscle and bone. The bull turned his head slightly, one large eye watching her. Dorothy met his gaze, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended species. He wasn't just an animal seeking companionship. He was choosing to protect her, to keep her warm, to keep her alive. "Thank you," Dorothy whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." The bull made that soft sound again, almost like a rumble of acknowledgement. Dorothy's hand moved to touch his neck, her fingers tangling in the coarse hair there. Tears streamed down her face again, but different tears this time, not of abandonment, but of gratitude, of wonder at this impossible mercy. As the stars emerged overhead, thousands of them, brilliant in the absence of city lights, Dorothy stayed pressed against the bull's warmth. Her own son had left her to die, but this animal, this creature who owed her nothing, had chosen to stay. "My husband used to say," Dorothy murmured, half delirious with exhaustion, "that God sends angels when we need them most. I always thought angels had wings. I never imagined one would have horns and hooves." The bull shifted slightly, adjusting his position to shield her better from the cold wind that had begun to blow across the prairie. His presence was solid, real, undeniable, a living fortress against the darkness. Dorothy's eyes grew heavy. She knew she should stay awake, that falling asleep in her condition was dangerous, but exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. Her last conscious thought was a simple prayer. "Please let me see morning. Just one more sunrise, The bull kept his vigil through the night, his ears alert to every sound, his body providing warmth and protection. Under the vast Texas sky, in the middle of nowhere, an elderly woman betrayed by her family found sanctuary in the most unlikely guardian, a bull who somehow understood that some creatures, no matter their species, deserved to be protected. Dawn broke over the Texas prairie with the explosion of pink and gold. Dorothy woke with a start, disoriented, her body stiff and aching from sleeping on the hard ground. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory crashed back like a physical blow. Brandon, the betrayal, the abandonment. But she was warm, still alive, and the bull was still there. He stood a few feet away, his massive head turned toward the rising sun. As if sensing she was awake, he looked back at her, those intelligent eyes meeting hers with unmistakable purpose. Dorothy tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her mouth was desert dry, her tongue swollen. She desperately needed water. Without it, she wouldn't survive another day in this heat. The bull made a low sound, not aggressive, but insistent. He took several steps away from her, then stopped and looked back, clearly waiting. "You want me to follow you?" Dorothy whispered, her voice barely working. The bull took a few more steps, stopped again, looked back. The message was clear. Using her cane, Dorothy forced herself to stand. Every muscle screamed in protest. Her hip felt like it was grinding bone against bone, but the bull was moving, and something told her she needed to trust him. They began to walk, Dorothy shuffling painfully, the bull maintaining a slow, steady pace ahead of her. He never went too far, always checking to ensure she was following. When she stumbled, he stopped and waited. When she needed to rest, he stood patiently until she could continue. After 30 agonizing minutes, Dorothy heard it, the most beautiful sound in the world. Water. Running water. The bull led her over a small rise, and there it was, a stock tank fed by a windmill, surrounded by worn cattle trails. The water was murky, probably unsafe by city standards, but Dorothy didn't care. She fell to her knees at the edge and drank deeply, cupping the water in her trembling hands. The bull drank beside her, his presence comforting and protective. When her thirst was finally quenched, Dorothy looked around. This was ranch property. She could see fence lines in the distance, a dirt road, tire tracks. Civilization existed somewhere nearby. The bull began walking again, following the fence line now. Dorothy followed, hope blooming painfully in her chest. Each step was agony, but she pushed forward, driven by survival instinct and trust in this remarkable animal who'd somehow become her savior. They walked for over an hour. The sun climbed higher, the heat becoming oppressive. Dorothy's vision began to blur, her steps becoming more unsteady. She was reaching the end of her strength when she heard it, a motor, a truck engine. Through her haze, she saw a weathered ranch house in the distance, a barn, corrals, and approaching along the dirt road was a pickup truck. The bull stopped, turned to look at Dorothy one final time. His eyes held hers for a long moment. A farewell, an acknowledgement of their impossible bond. Then he turned and walked calmly toward the approaching vehicle, Dorothy struggling to follow behind him. The truck stopped abruptly. A man in his 60s jumped out, his weathered face showing complete shock. "Jupiter, what the hell?" He spotted Dorothy, and his expression shifted to alarm. Ma'am, are you all right?" Dorothy tried to speak, but her legs gave out. The rancher, his name was Wade Carson, she'd learn later, caught her before she hit the ground. "Jupiter brought you here?" Wade asked, incredulous, looking between the elderly woman and his prize-breeding bull who'd escaped from his pasture 2 days ago. "He saved my life," Dorothy managed to whisper before darkness claimed her. Wade carried her to his truck, called 911, and wrapped her in a blanket. As paramedics were dispatched, he watched in amazement as Jupiter calmly walked back to his pasture, as if his work was complete. The bull had found someone who needed help, protected her through the night, led her to water, and brought her home to safety. Wade Carson had worked with cattle for 40 years, but he'd never seen anything like it. "That's not just a bull," he muttered, watching Jupiter settle peacefully in the shade. That's something else entirely. Dorothy woke in a hospital bed in Amarillo, tubes connected to her arms, machines beeping steadily beside her. Her body ached everywhere, but she was alive, clean, hydrated, safe. A nurse noticed her stirring. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're awake. Thank God. You've been unconscious for 8 hours. Let me get the doctor and the detective. He's been waiting to speak with you." Detective Marcus Riley entered 10 minutes later. A tall man in his 50s with gray temples and sharp, observant eyes. He'd worked homicide for 23 years and had developed an instinct for when something didn't add up. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Detective Riley. Your son Brandon reported you missing yesterday evening. Said you wandered off during a family outing. But the rancher who found you, Wade Carson, said his bull led you to his property. And you were found 50 miles from where your son claimed you disappeared. I need you to tell me exactly what happened." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "My son didn't lose me, Detective. He abandoned me. Deliberately, he and his wife drove me into the middle of nowhere and left me there to die." Riley's expression didn't change, but his pen moved faster across his notepad. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am. Why would they do that?" "Money, my inheritance. $300,000 in life insurance, my house, my savings. Brandon's wife, Crystal, has been pressuring him for months. I heard them talking one night when they thought I was asleep." Dorothy's voice cracked. "I'm not as senile as they think I am. I knew something was wrong, but I never thought my own son could." Riley had seen many things in his career, but elder abuse cases always hit him hardest. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to walk me through everything, every detail you remember." For the next hour, Dorothy recounted the entire ordeal. The drive, Brandon's cold eyes, the moment he drove away, the terrifying night on the prairie, and Jupiter, the bull who'd saved her life. When she finished, Riley sat back. "Ma'am, I'm going to be honest with you. Your son's story has problems. He claims you wandered off at a rest stop near the interstate. But Wade Carson found you 50 miles in the opposite direction, deep in ranch country that tourists never visit. That's not wandering. That's being taken there." "Will you arrest him?" Dorothy asked quietly. "I need more evidence first." "But I'm going to get it." Riley stood. "Rest now, Mrs. Whitmore. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. No one deserves what you went through." Riley drove straight to Brandon and Crystal's house. They answered the door with practiced concern, their faces arranged in expressions of grief and worry. "Detective, have you found my mother?" Brandon asked, his voice trembling convincingly. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. She's alive, recovering in Amarillo Regional. Severe dehydration, exposure, but she'll survive." Relief flashed across their faces, but Riley noticed it wasn't the relief of joy. It was the relief of a plan unraveling, of needing to adjust strategy. "Thank God," Crystal said, her hand clutching her chest dramatically. "Where did you find her?" 50 miles from where you said she disappeared, on private ranch property. She was led there by a bull." Riley watched their reactions carefully. "Quite a story. Your mother has an interesting version of events, too. She says you drove her out there deliberately and abandoned her." Brandon's face went pale. That's crazy. She has dementia. She's confused." "Funny thing about that," Riley said casually. "I spoke with her neurologist. She has mild memory issues, but nothing that would cause delusions. She remembers everything quite clearly, including the conversation she overheard between you and your wife about her inheritance." Crystal's composure cracked. "This is ridiculous. We would never." "I've already requested your phone records, your financial statements, and your vehicle's GPS data," Riley interrupted. "If you drove where you claim, the GPS will prove it. If you drove somewhere else..." He let the sentence hang. Brandon's hands were shaking. "I want a lawyer." "Smart choice," Riley said. "You're going to need one. Attempted murder, conspiracy, elderly abuse. These charges carry serious time in Texas." As Riley walked back to his car, he called Wade Carson. "Mr. Carson, I need to ask you about that bull of yours. Jupiter, you called him?" "Yes, sir. Smartest bull I've ever owned. Too smart sometimes. He figures out latches, opens gates. I've had to reinforce everything twice. Any chance he's protective? That he might have sensed Mrs. Whitmore needed help? Wade was quiet for a moment. Detective, I've worked cattle for 40 years. I've never seen anything like what Jupiter did. He escaped his pasture 2 days ago, something he's never done. Then he comes back with a dying woman he somehow kept alive and led to safety. That's not normal bull behavior. I don't know what that is. A miracle, maybe. Riley thought about that. Mr. Carson, would you mind if Mrs. Whitmore visited Jupiter? When she's recovered, I think she'd like to thank him. Detective, that bull saved her life. She can visit him anytime she wants. Hell, I'd give him to her if she wanted. 3 days later, Brandon and Crystal were arrested. The GPS data from their truck confirmed they'd driven exactly where Dorothy described, deep into isolated ranch country. Crystal's deleted texts to her sister were recovered, including one that read, "It's done. The old lady won't be a problem anymore." The evidence was overwhelming. 2 weeks after her rescue, Dorothy stood at the fence of Wade Carson's ranch, her hand trembling as she clutched a bag of apples. She'd recovered physically. The doctors said it was miraculous for someone her age. But the emotional scars ran deeper. Wade approached with a gentle smile. He's been restless since you left, almost like he's been waiting for you. Jupiter stood in the pasture, magnificent in the morning sun. When he saw Dorothy, his head lifted, his ears swiveled forward. He walked toward the fence with purpose, his massive body moving with surprising grace. Dorothy's tears came immediately. "Hello, my friend," she whispered. Jupiter stopped at the fence, lowered his great head, and pressed it gently against her chest. The same gesture of protection he'd shown that terrible night on the prairie. Dorothy wrapped her arms around his massive neck, sobbing into his warm hide. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not leaving me. Thank you for seeing me when my own family refused to." Wade stood at a respectful distance, his own eyes wet. In his 40 years ranching, he'd never witnessed anything like this connection. The trial was swift. Brandon and Crystal's lawyers tried to argue confusion, misunderstanding, accident. But the GPS data, the texts, and Dorothy's clear testimony left no doubt. Brandon received 12 years for attempted murder. Crystal received 10 for conspiracy. Both would serve time in separate facilities. Dorothy attended the sentencing. When the judge asked if she had a statement, she stood slowly, her voice steady. "My son chose money over love. He chose greed over humanity. But in my darkest moment, when I'd lost faith in people, an animal showed me that mercy still exists in this world. Jupiter didn't save me for money or inheritance. He saved me because it was the right thing to do. He's a better soul than many humans I've known." She looked directly at Brandon. "I forgive you, but I'll never forget, and I hope someday you understand what you threw away." Brandon broke down crying. Crystal stared at the floor. Dorothy sold her house and used the money to purchase 20 acres adjacent to Wade's ranch. She built a small cottage there, simple, comfortable, with a porch that overlooked Jupiter's pasture. Every morning, she walked to the fence with treats. Every evening, Jupiter came to greet her. Sometimes they simply stood together in comfortable silence, woman and bull, survivor and guardian. Wade insisted she never pay a cent for Jupiter's care. "That bull's special, and so are you, ma'am. Some things can't be measured in money." Dorothy established the Jupiter Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to elder abuse prevention and animal sanctuary support. Her story had gone viral, covered by national news. Donations poured in from around the world. "People want to believe in goodness," she told reporters. "Jupiter reminded me, and now the world, that it still exists." On her 77th birthday, Dorothy sat on her porch as the sun set over the Texas prairie. Jupiter grazed nearby, occasionally lifting his head to check on her. Wade had told her the bull always positioned himself where he could see her cottage. She thought about Brandon sometimes, wondered if prison had changed him. She'd written him one letter, telling him she forgave him but would never see him again. He'd never responded. But she didn't dwell on betrayal anymore. Instead, she focused on the miracle. A 2,000-pound bull with a soul bigger than most humans, who'd chosen compassion over instinct, protection over indifference. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Jupiter walked to the fence. Dorothy stood, walked to meet him, placed her hand on his warm neck. "You saved more than my life," she whispered. "You saved my faith in goodness itself." Jupiter's deep rumble seemed like acknowledgement. They stood together as night fell, two souls who'd found each other in the darkest moment, proving that sometimes angels wear the most unexpected forms. And in the vast Texas prairie, under infinite stars, love, true, unconditional, transcendent love, needed no words at all.